Hello, everybody at XDS. My name is Victor Lucas from the Electric Playground, and I have to tell you, when I found out that I was going to be virtually hosting, I guess I'm really hosting, but in a virtual way, XDS this year, the thing that was most exciting to me was that I was going to be able to talk and sit down with my friend Amy Hennig, who I've known for about 25 years at this point.
I know, we were doing the math. It's crazy, right?
It's insane. You know her work from the Soul Reaver games and Jack and Daxter and the Uncharted games, and you're about to find out all about her new direction as the president of New Media. Well, not everything.
Some secrets
not everything.
I gotta keep.
But she's got a lot of stories to tell, and we have got Amy Hennig for a whole hour. Amy, it is so fantastic to see you, my friend.
I know, it's so good to see you too, Vic. It's been a long friendship. If only we could do this in person, like I said.
I know. Well, we will get to a lot, and I think people around the world are very curious to have your insights and a look into the experience that you've had. And I think what we should do is kind of start with the early days and look back on your career a bit. And my specific question to you is kind of what drew you to video games? Were you a fan? Were you playing and you thought there might be a career for me here?
Never there might be a career for me here until the very last minute. I had all these other ambitions, but I was a kid who was obsessed with video games, such as it was. I mean, we're talking Pong, Night Driver, Atari 2600, because I'm 56 years old. So, we got to go into the Wayback Machine here.
Right.
But I was obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons and video games and Star Wars. So you can kind of see how like I was on a collision course with my future. I just didn't know it. And I studied English literature. I studied film production and film theory. Had this idea that I wanted to be a writer / filmmaker.
Where was all this? Where did you grow up?
So Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And so I went to UC Berkeley, and then I was getting my master's in film at San Francisco State. And it was pretty close to finishing, but the irony is I was taking any small job I could get just to pay the bills and pay for school. And one of those small jobs just serendipitously turned out to be doing all the art, design, and animation for an Atari 7800 game with just one programmer down in San Jose.
What was the game?
Well, it never came out, so these are things that they're always humbling. It was Electra Cop, but not the Atari Lynx version. They just used the same name, and it was like a pretty ambitious, Nintendo style side scroller. We're really proud of it. It just never actually got published.
Right.
It's one of those lost treasures, we'll say. But it sort of whet my appetite. And I kind of had that light bulb moment that we often have where we go like, well, wait a second, or maybe I could apply all of these skills and these things that I love and go to this, blue ocean, this new frontier where you can be a pioneer and not feel like you're fighting kind of all the entrenched hierarchies of these existing mediums. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And from what I know of the Bay Area as well, like there are a lot of supporting film studios and people like Lucasfilm and Pixar and things like that, but it's not the central hub of where ideas in the film industry really start. They have to kind of be paid for from down south. But I guess what really happened out of the Bay Area is that the game studios became its own geographically located industry there, and that must have been beneficial for you.
Sure, yeah, because what happened was I sort of, cobbled together a portfolio of the work that I'd done, as well as my work from film school, and got a job as a junior artist, entry level at Electronic Arts in 1991. And then from Electronic Arts, I went to Crystal Dynamics, and then I made the leap to LA and went and joined Naughty Dog in 2003. But the first 12 years of my career were here in the Bay Area. And so the irony is like going to film school, I had these ambitions of like, I want to be a filmmaker. I want to make movies like Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And of course, the message I was kind of getting is like, you're dreaming way too big, and that's never going to happen, especially as a woman. And again, sadly, this was in the late 80s, and I would have hoped we were more progressive at that point. But I saw these barriers to doing the thing I dreamed to do, and And strangely, even though it was not clear what the course of the game industry would be, because it was just pixels and, one page of graphics, and, it was very limiting, right?
Right.
But this idea that there was this nascent industry, and
You
so
saw
the
the
irony is
potential.
I've ended up working on, what may as well be Indiana Jones, because it's a love letter too, and worked on Star Wars. Unfortunately, another game that didn't see the light of day. But
It's
this is
so
the
funny
life we
because
live.
video games in Hollywood have always been on this collision course. And how different would have this all turned out if if Hollywood was the birthing place of so many of these I mean, obviously it's a big
It,
hub for games now,
it is
but
now, yeah.
it wasn't really considered where games came out of, and I feel like that autonomy helped to craft a little bit of mystery that Hollywood was enticed by.
Yeah, and remains enticed, I think, because although it's somewhat misleading, the statistics of saying the game industry makes more than the film industry. It depends like how you count and what you're counting. But
Sure.
I think what's interesting for me too in my own course that I've charted in my life is that so games began as software, right? And there's some lingering kind of issues around that, I think, on our industry, where we think about things as having, features and bullet points versus thinking of it as this holistic entertainment product, right? And so that's one of the things in looking for my next thing after Electronic Arts, this recent gig at Electronic Arts. Finding a home at Skydance felt it was unexpected and then just so comfortable and natural, because here you've got a company that fundamentally understands it's about story and character. If you don't get those things right, nobody shows up and nobody cares, right?
Yes.
So whereas in the game industry, you often have to fight to say, look, story's important. Let's not treat it as sidecard onto the main game or some sort of afterthought, And sometimes those conversations still happen today, even though I hope we've proven that, games with story can be wildly successful, right?
Well, it's not, you make it look very easy though, Amy, and it's not the same at every studio. And I think the part of the struggle for the balance of story versus gameplay is because the storytelling has not been nurtured in quite the way that maybe it should be in the video game space.
No, and look, there is something meaningful in the fact that if you look at studios that have excelled in interactive storytelling, it's very often true that the creative director is also the lead writer, right? And it's because you need to be advocating for the story every single day, not over gameplay, but in the marriage with, right? And too often in studios, the focus is entirely on the feature set. It's on the design, which is all important stuff. Yeah. And story is sort of like, oh, when we're going to hire a writer and they're going to come in. And it's like that never is going to mesh, because every hour, every day, these things diverge. And our job as creative directors, who are also the lead writers, is to continually sew it back together again, right?
The only time I've seen that kind of work is in the comic book video game, where they have employed comic book writers to kind of create authenticity. But if you're crafting something brand new, like your Nathan Drake adventures, you have to sort of navigate through how gameplay comes into play and how storytelling comes into play. What's the best lesson that you learned from Nathan Drake?
Oh my gosh, the best lesson I learned from Nathan Drake. I guess it's what I just said, that story and gameplay are the same thing, right? If the gameplay better be advancing the story, and the story better be supporting the gameplay, right? That when we treat these things as separate, it's very tangible in the final product, right? And so when I say that as directors, we have to have this sort of holistic, flexible approach, it's because, you sort of set the goal. You set the North Star for the team of going, this is what is meant to be happening in the story right now, right? And then interactively, you have to let them go and figure out what the best expression of that is in the game. And then you go, and sometimes you have to tug them back and go, that's actually going to kind of diverge from the story. Or you go, that's amazing, and now I'm actually going to write the scene a different way that will support getting in and out of that moment. So it is this constant handoff, right? And that I think is fundamentally, this is why these things are hard to ape.
Yeah.
When companies are trying to emulate, say, what say Naughty Dog has accomplished, right? Is because it's not about the ingredients, it's about the underlying ethos and philosophy behind it, right? And I've said that also about why do we get good results on the stage. It's not about we wore these kind of suits and we did the crew look like this and these were the people here and you know we had a rehearsal day. It was the underlying ethos of, you know, check your ego at the door, you know, playful collaboration with the actors. And and look, this is relevant to the larger theme here, right? I mean,
it is.
Which is, man, you better be working with your external partners as close collaborators and yes-anding them and giving them ownership, right? Otherwise, this old school attitude around outsourcing, which is really a pejorative for me, this idea that you make a list of the assets that you need and you throw it over the fence and then you get something back. It's like, that is not the way to do it. The way to do it is to treat your external partners just as if they were, you know, internal partners. They were employees. And in this brave new world that we're all living in now, where we're all remote working, it is all the same thing, right?
Was
but
this something that
it was our philosophy going in, you know?
Was this something that you learned while at Naughty Dog? Because obviously, you know, you scaling from PlayStation 2 to PS3 and the Uncharted success and the team size must have been eye-opening and come with its own set of challenges. Was it a necessity to kind of share that workload?
Sure. I mean, and I don't have it in front of me, of course, but if you can track like the team size and sort of the production methodology from, say, Uncharted 1 up till, you know, I'll say Last of Us, because that was the last game where I was at Naughty Dog and kind of witnessing. We went from, you know, maybe 75 people on the team and 0 outsourcing. I'll still use the word outsourcing because that was how we thought of it. To, you know, you can end up, I think in the Last of Us 2 probably had 300 people on the team and probably, you know, well over a dozen external partners, right? And so there's just been a shift in the industry where, you know, these external partners are experts in their field. They're experts in their discipline. And instead of trying to necessarily recruit those people to be under your roof, which, look, there's only so many of them to go around, right? We should be engaging them as externals, right? Honoring their independence as a unit, right? But leaning into their expertise. And so, so it's been, I think, something we've learned over time. We didn't used to do any sort of distributed development like that because we were just sort of small teams. And so, but philosophically, it's something, you know, when I was, you know, last at EA working on Ragtag, the Star Wars game, one of our key relationships was with EA Shanghai, which was sort of started as sort of an outsourcing arm of the organization. And to be honest and candid, there was a little bit of repairing that had to be done to that relationship when we were working with them to say, we do not see you that way as sort of, you know, a vendor to whom we are delivering, you know, task list. We want you to feel like you are members of the team. Your desk just happens to be geographically a little farther away, right?
Right.
And so I think it's something we've had to evolve to as an industry, but it's something that I and my partners in this venture, from all of our own varied experience, brought into this from the get-go. Right, is that this is how we're structuring our business. When you're building a new studio from the ground up, you're not going to do it the old way.
Totally. We've got a lot of companies that are obviously attending XDS, looking to create some of these relationships. And, you know, I'm wondering how you can share some wisdom about how you foster those relationships and maintain them so that you have, you know, a long partnership and you're able to collaborate on many projects together.
Right. Well, it's exactly what I said. And look, I think it's extending the principles that you would hopefully be applying internally to all of your external partners as well, which is, again, that you're not trying to, like, as a director, hold the reins so white-knuckled tightly that all people are doing is executing on, like I said, the tasks that you're giving them with no kind of independence or freedom or ownership, right? I mean, that's soul crushing for that person. So, and it'd be
So
soul crushing for that
you have that
organization.
insight, but on the other side,
Yes.
what do they need to provide to you so that you feel that
Mm-hmm.
comfort in letting go of those reins?
Well, first, I mean, obviously they need to have the level of expertise and experience that would be required to entrust them with that sort
Yeah.
of autonomy, right? And that's why, and look, if there's somebody who's newer, maybe really talented but needs a little bit more guidance, then you dial it in as appropriate, right? But in general, the way we've structured this new venture in the studios, we're going to stay small, right?
Yeah.
We're in the double digits and the low double digits, and we're never gonna be in the triples, I don't think. And the goal is to have this internal team of absolute veterans who are directors in their own right, 20 plus years of experience in their field and their discipline, and then have all of these spokes going out to external partners who are absolute specialists in their fields. And each of these directors then will work closely with those teams. But that same level of trust that I have to extend to the people internally, and again, there is no such thing as internally anymore. It's all this
Yes.
anymore. It's all faces on
Yes.
screens.
It's so true.
But it's if you have to then say, look, here's the goal. Here's what we're aiming for. Here's the pillars that you can use as sort of guide rails. And we'll tug you back if you go in the wrong direction. But if you're telling them what you're trying to accomplish and then leaving them enough room to really feel ownership, they're going to deliver something much greater and probably surprise you and plus what you would have come up with initially. And so this is the idea. Everything is improv, right? Which is really
Yeah.
hard because for people that want to really ratchet down on production, want everything to be noble, well, they're going to lead very frustrated lives because what we do is inherently unknowable. It requires an act of
Yes.
faith every day, all the time, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so you have to be able to go, here are the parameters, and now yes and me, and all yes and you, and we'll kind of
Very
keep
nice.
elevating and plussing the work together. But that's why it's really important for people with this veteran level experience to have the holistic understanding of the product so that they can correct and adjust like you would with an actor, right? Saying
Yeah.
a little bit of this, not quite that.
Yeah.
But then also to absolutely embrace the unexpected that your partners bring. And go, yes, we're going to do that, and we're going to actually change something else to be flexible around that, right? So I don't know. It is an abstract philosophy. I can't give you a bullet list of do this, this, and this. But I think that's how you make excellent work, and that sort of organic collaboration is absolutely tangible in the final product.
100%. It's such a wonderful industry for that because it's always reinventing. It's always kind of repositioning itself on how we're going to move forward. And I think the pandemic this year has just been an upheaval and an awareness of how disciplined people can be in external situations like this.
Yeah,
but it's also interesting
for us.
It's interesting for me to see the full circle idea of you starting as a film student and kind of adopting a lot of film production philosophy in the way that you're making games now. Right?
Absolutely. No, that's a great sort of segue to what I was thinking is, so when we started off to do this, and my business partner, Julian Beek, and I, we were kind of the co-founders of this venture, in partnership with Skydance Media. We were like, okay, ground up, we're building this thing. What's important, right? What matters? How can we take all of our combined experience and then sort of have the humility to go, let's rethink this and not think that this is sort of like development dogma that we're just going to recreate, right? And so one of those things is, and why we were so excited to partner with a media company that has spokes in TV, film, animation, et cetera, right? Is that we're leaning hard into what we can learn from these other disciplines while also retaining what we do better, right? Obviously it's not complete humility. There's certain things we do really well. But this idea we think of ourselves much more like a media production company. It just happens to be interactive, right? So that we
Right.
have this small constant team, this core team of, at least starting with veteran level people and then expanding from there, right? And then just like you would if you were a film director or, a producer who is making a film, you then start bringing in the talent who is right for the project, right? Who has the right experience, the right viewpoint, and then also look at who's in their network that works well with them. So, you hire a director who then brings in their DP, who, brings in their production designer, right? It's sort of like, but the way, film and TV production works, these things wax and wane, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy that because it was software development, that we built up this way of working that was like, nope, it's all under your roof. You're carrying that overhead all the time, right? Which is why the pressure to figure out how you're like reapportioning resources all the time and like trying to do DLC so you're keeping everybody busy, which again can
Which
be
is all
soul
tied to
crushing for
a
people, right?
technical kind of software
Yes,
packaged thing. And
but we
that
make
isn't the way.
entertainment.
Yeah, you're entertainment. You're telling stories,
Yes.
and it's been an amazing year as we talk about film and video games kind of correlating. And certainly this is applicable to Skydance. But
Mm-hmm.
We have Tom Holland as Nathan
Yep.
Drake. On
Yeah.
images have
And he looks
happened.
great. Yeah.
He does look great. And today, Assassin's Creed is announced as a new series for Netflix. They're going to do live action and animation.
Mm-hmm.
Sonic the Hedgehog it was a massive hit. So I think we're crossing into that space that Hollywood has been threatening us with for a long time. I think we're going to start to see some video game characters and properties turn into actually really successful movie and TV properties. And so suddenly the equation of everybody working in sync with each
it's
other.
all going to get very blurry. And look, one of the reasons for that, one of the reasons you're seeing video game adaptations that are actually good is because of the age. I mean, and you don't want to be, look, I don't want to be ageist. I mean, I was born in 1964, so like, I don't want to put myself call myself old, but like you see these young guys coming into film, they're in their 30s or whatever, and they grew up on games. And so like, there's a respect for the medium that I don't think existed when there were more sort of cynical adaptations being made. Sure. Oh, like this game is popular, we should make a movie of that. But then, the producers and filmmakers didn't really understand the property or love it, right? But now you've got a whole group of young filmmakers who have come up on games, and they see it as a very valid medium, and they're homaging it. So it's just this kind of like love letter back and forth between film and games now. And I think we are realizing that this sort of merge, and look, this is kind of fundamentally what our venture is about, is that, like I said, at the end of the day, what people really care about is story and characters, especially sort of like, the larger audience that we sometimes leave unserved with interactive entertainment. Right. We think that, we want to be first movers in this space where we're going to be able to not only reach longtime gamers with interactive content that is fresh and inviting and engaging for them, but is also inviting to this larger audience. And there's, we spent a lot of time, and I won't, deep dive on this because it's a different talk, but like, about thinking about what those frictions are that would keep the sort of larger audience as well as gamers feeling invited and engaged, right? One of those things we see on the horizon is, the emergence of cloud-based streaming. And
Facebook entered the fray this week. Jason Rubin,
Naughty
Dog, is running Facebook cloud gaming now.
There you go, right? And so it's all just, these lines are all going to get blurred is basically, the idea is that, and so really, we're founding this on the idea that we can be creating best-in-class interactive entertainment that sits right alongside the linear entertainment people have been enjoying, for years. And look, I think even pointing back to Uncharted, you can see that DNA in that thinking. And we're just kind of evolving that idea so that we can be first movers in this sort of new frontier where I think we will be able to reach everyone. And I think everyone loves play and everyone loves story. And we're going to be able to reach everyone with interactive entertainment that is rich and meaningful and like moment-to-moment interactive. You know, we're not talking about branching video or anything like that. I mean, this is
Right.
the DNA of this thing is a lot more like Uncharted than anything else, and so that's the easiest thing to point to. Um, uh, but we see a world in a very few years where interactive, like deep, rich, high-fidelity interactive content is going to be sitting right alongside linear content on services like Netflix and Disney Plus, right?
Amy, if there was ever a perfect commercial for that this year, it would be the millions of frustrated gamers that tried to pre-order a PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X.
I'm
When
one
you
of
talk
them.
about, yeah, when you talk about friction, it's like, yeah, the video game industry is excellent
Yeah.
at putting up different and I have to tell you this, when I was putting our content on television, which is a mainstream vehicle, and I would interview folks like yourself at Naughty Dog and things, and I would put up Uncharted or Batman content in our show. That spoke to everybody,
Well,
and
look,
I really saw that as this is going to break down, doors, and more people are
yeah.
going to come on board. So I am fully on board with your vision for Skydance.
Okay, good. Sign you up. Yeah,
I'm
and
in,
look,
but
I
you knew
mean,
that.
we are equally excited. I mean, I don't want to over-index on the streaming stuff. I'm just saying, it feels like this is an inevitable
Sure.
transformation of entertainment, just like streaming video and streaming music transformed those industries, right?
Yes.
We are equally excited about the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, and we want to make sure that our work is showing up there, because those machines are incredible. And but I also see sort of an industry-wide evolution. Even when you talk to the people that are making those machines, they see the same evolution, which is this stuff is just going to get Trojan horse directly to our TVs and devices, and
Yeah.
and then it's going to be incredibly democratizing in terms of who can play, and how frictionlessly they can play, right, and
Just as
engage.
Hollywood is figuring out how to make good video game movies. It couldn't
That's
write
right.
itself better, right? We're going to
Right.
get more
Right.
people involved in this.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's been an interesting journey for us too, just kind of going back to the external partners, remote work thing, is because we announced this venture almost a year ago, right? And we're diving into recruiting and establishing partnerships, and talking to all the business stuff that you'd be doing, right? Um, building a studio. We have an empty studio, right? Right across the way here. Um, uh, and then the pandemic hit, right? And so it made us rethink a lot. And we were already open to the idea that if certain people couldn't relocate, that we could make that work, right? And now, of course, we're just all remote. And just like the whole world, it's sort of I hate to call it a silver lining because that's grotesque, because this is a horrible
Yes.
situation.
Yes,
But
it is.
it is an interesting worldwide test case, litmus test
Mm.
for how we can do this. And so it actually opened up a bunch of doors for us. People who we thought were maybe just colleagues and thought partners, but there was no way they were going to relocate. Suddenly we were like, or you could just work for us and stay where you are, right?
Right.
Like time zone becomes more important than geography, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so we
And
already
there's also
have to.
benefits to that too, though, right? Because you can have people working on assets ahead of time
Sure.
that are ready for you. Yeah, it is a very, very interesting and intriguing world. Hey, you know
Yeah.
what? I want to just put out a call out to everybody that's watching this. We have a Q&A section, and we're about to go into it. And so please go ahead and ask us on the XDS Connect page. Click on Q&A, and if you've got any questions for Amy, I'll do my best to navigate through them, and we'll ask them directly. But yeah, I think the lessons that we're all learning this year. And I want to project one too that I have learned as well as a content creator in this space that wakes up every day and puts a piece of video out there about what's going on in video games. At first, I felt incredibly guilty that was my job. That I would
Because it seems
just
frivolous, or
it does. When there's so much darkness
yeah, we
and
talk about that.
yeah. But then you hear from people.
Mhm.
And you haven't started to ship stuff yet, so I don't think you're hearing directly from people, but you hear from people, and it is a life preserver. It is
it's a lifeline. It gives people joy and hope.
yeah.
And And then, so when we feel that way, especially like, my wheelhouse, it tends to be, I mean, it's behind me here, it's
Yeah.
Star Wars. It's a lot of swashbuckle and pulp adventure, and there's sort of a lighthearted optimism to a lot of that stuff. And sometimes there are days, with a news cycle where you go, this isn't important,
Yeah.
but if you look back in history, it's entertainment that
Yes.
changes hearts and minds,
Well, it also gets us through the world too,
and
right?
optimism and hope,
Yeah.
right? This
It's a
is how
thing to
you
look
communicate
forward
these
to.
things. It is, yeah. And
Like, I don't know
so
if you know, but Mandalorian starts on Friday. I don't.
believe me, I know. Believe me, I know. And we have to have things to look forward to in this world, right? But yes, I mean, and there are moments where it's hard. You feel distracted, right,
Yeah.
by what's
Yeah.
going on. But I think that, without being sort of, self-aggrandizing, like, I think we as creators have to realize that what we do is very important.
Yes.
And not only in terms of sort of communicating messages, which doesn't mean it's propaganda. It's just meaning that, all entertainment can have sort of, deeper messages underneath, and fundamentally, just like with Star Wars, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's about hope, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Hope in the face of despair, right? And so, uh, what we do is important, and I think it's okay for us to remember that and soldier on, enthusiastically, right?
100%. And that's a message out to everybody that's watching around the world right now. This work is important, and it has real value for millions of people out there. So we're going to get into some Q&A questions right now. This one is from Jeffrey. As we start a new console cycle with improved graphics and all the bells and whistles, in your opinion, how important is the creative direction of a script compared to the actual graphics of the game, which is kind of the core message that you're communicating right now?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we talk about fidelity a lot, and for what we're doing, really high visual fidelity is really important, right? But that doesn't, and for us that means photoreal, as close as we can come with a little bit of stylization maybe, but like, that doesn't have to be universally true, right? So there's a couple answers to that question. One is that the graphics don't matter if your story's bad and the writing's bad and the performances are bad, right? Like, it doesn't matter how pretty it is, and we've certainly probably seen things that would fall into that category. And the flip side is if you have an incredibly well-crafted, meaningful story, the graphics don't actually have to be that great. I mean, I was just talking to people yesterday about the game That Dragon Cancer, right? I mean, like, one of the most moving experiences, right, that I've ever had, and they would never say, and look at our graphics, right? That wasn't the point. They were doing what they could do to tell the story they had to tell, right? And so the script is way more important than the graphics. But if you can get them both right, like, and when we talk about graphics, fidelity means, I think, just internal consistency and quality, right? Right. It doesn't necessarily mean photoreal. For us, it does, but I think in general, when we talk about that, know the story you're trying to tell, engage your writers and actors or whoever you're working with as collaborators, so the stuff feels organic and real and immediate. And and do the best damn job you can on the graphics, but I think they're secondary.
Amy, I once played, I can't remember the name of this game. I think it was The Journey or something like that. It was a little Java game where you started off and you live a life and you're walking along. There wasn't much to the game, but I don't know if you know this one, but you met this person and then you start walking together and then that person passes. And I was crying. I was playing this little Java game. I'm like, oh my God.
How about Papers, Please? I mean, incredibly moving. We talk about Florence a lot. Now, granted, so there's a great example. That art was intentional and felt authored and was internally consistent. It wasn't photoreal. It was an interactive comic, right? Still one of the most moving experiences that people talk about. Thomas Was Alone, another great example. They're just differently shaped, boxes, and you're like, it's an incredibly moving story, right? So you have to understand what the core idea underneath the, is that you're trying to tell, and you have to love it. And that'll come through regardless of the graphics.
Awesome. This one is from Junie. Are there any particular developments, technology or otherwise, that you're looking forward to or are very excited about? And if so, why? We touched a little bit on streaming, but maybe there's some other things.
Trying to think what I can talk about or not. Well, I mean, look, I'll talk about streaming some more. And I know some people are sort of cynical about it.
Yes. Yeah.
Gamers particularly, just because they think, and look, I don't see it as a funnel to now try to shove the existing catalog of games at an audience that hasn't been engaged by them already, right?
Right.
So when we talk about friction, some of it could be, cost, console, controls, content, and fidelity. There could be all these things. The content being one is that it's like, well, they've already decided not to buy a console and engage with that content. So just, using that pipe and trying to get it down their gullets isn't the thing, right?
And to be clear, most people don't. Most people don't buy like consoles sell quite well, but most people don't buy them,
Yeah.
And so
that's the thing. When you're talking, we have this sort of, it's a big core audience of gamers, but not compared to the massive people who enjoy story and play, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And, when we talk about what we're doing, we see this gulf between kind of, and I won't call it hardcore, but like sort of long-time committed gamers, and I count myself as one, right?
Sure.
And then extremely casual. But there's this gulf in between that we saw. At first we thought it was sort of anecdotal, then we realized it was sort of a universal phenomenon. That when we made Uncharted, that people's non-gamer loved ones, spouses, parents, friends, would not only watch, they would say, "Don't play that without me." And it was for them also an interactive and collaborative experience. They weren't just watching it like a TV show. They were leaning forward and saying, wait, I think I saw something, go left, wait, go quiet, there's somebody over there. I think I saw a treasure, let's open that up and look at it. So, it's always hung in my mind that it's like, why are we not making this stuff for them, right? And that's not an instead, it's an also, right? Why are we not making it possible for these people to play as well? Because we already know they want to. I don't believe that there are such a thing as non-gamers. It's just within the sort of like, limited semantic, dogmatic definitions of gamer, right? But people universally enjoy games and play, and people universally enjoy story. So why are we not creating something that they can universally participate in?
You just have to look at how much money Apple makes on the iPhone from games and to know that we're all playing games, but we're maybe not accessing the most interesting software out there, the most interesting stories in games.
Yeah, and I'm so right really, there with I think you. That is the most transformative thing that's coming.
Well, the fact that Facebook is in, Amazon is in, Microsoft is in, these are not like bit players. Like they're taking this very seriously, and any one of them can be massively successful with this. And I think the least amount of barriers to entry. This week, Ubisoft and Google teamed up where you could play Immortals Phoenix Rising just from clicking a link. You didn't even need an account or anything. You could play it on Stadia.
Exactly. And that's what I mean by the frictionlessness. Can you just, can somebody send you a link and you click it and holy crap, you're playing, and playing in a way that like you didn't realize was actually possible in terms of how rich the analog control of a thing could be, how easy it could be, This is one of the problems, and this gets us into a whole other topic that I won't dive into, but like, sadly, this increasingly bristling with buttons controller that goes along with being a console gamer is for a lot of people just a hard barrier, right? And it's one that's hard. I don't think we want to be thinking about how we convert these people to being gamers, right? I think we always talk about what we need to do is meet them where they are. And again, that's not abandoning our core audience, right? And our longtime fans at all. It's just widening our embrace to also go like, why are we not being more inclusive? And how do we do that? And you're already seeing these trends in the industry in terms of like accessibility and things like that. But this is even just in terms of kind of rethinking content and verbs and and just dogma around game design.
Well, and it's incumbent on these platform holders, these streaming stakeholders, to invest in that. Like what is going to bring people to this, but then they can't
Yes.
also fall victim to those age-old gate restrictive, philosophies, and say, well, you can only play it here, because that
Yeah.
also diminishes the
No,
message,
we need
right?
to evangelize the idea that play is everywhere and for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, let's see what we got here. We have this one's from Mikhail Izmailov. In general, how difficult is it to provide external partners with the values and general ideas of the narrative so that their end work result fits the ecosystem of the project properly? I guess this is the, not wanting to reveal too much because you don't want the stuff to leak, but
Yeah,
you need to share
right.
some, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Well, look, I mean, you have to be able to trust your partners. And a lot of the people that we work with, I mean, they work on big feature films, or like, I mean, they're NDA'd up the wazoo. They understand that, uh, it would be catastrophic and devastating if things were to leak. But yes, there is a certain degree of, just having to trust, right?
Yeah.
But fundamentally, right, we talk internally because we're just sort of getting started with our team and building relationships with our external partners. We're not deep into production. We've got our first two projects lined up, but we're in pre-production on the first. And we talk a lot about buy-in, right? And so again, the same principles that you would have internally, which is like, well, if your team doesn't understand what you're making in a way that actually empowers them to make decisions autonomously, and they don't have a buy-in on the high level pillars in the vision,
Right.
well, you're screwed, right? But it's like, and if they do, well, then all you have to do is try to extend that same messaging out to your partners. And then also that can be a litmus test to see whether that's a right partner because they respond to that or not. If what they
Right.
want is to be handed art briefs that they then go execute on, and look, there may be a place for that if you have a whole bunch of props that need to be made or something like that. But in general, we have to evangelize this way of working, which is maybe not necessarily normal for some of these groups who are used to be
Right.
handed briefs and
Right.
lists of things, right? We have to evangelize the idea that we we want them to have some creative ownership, and then just sort of just a buy-in on our general methods, right? So it's kind of like dating. If it seems like you're not compatible, you shouldn't get married, right? But it's like in general, people have responded to that really well because I think it's sadly rare.
I mean, it always amazes me because I know that so much of how a game really hangs and comes together is in that final few months. There's
Yeah,
so much prototyping and
it's the
slivers of
faith,
stuff, and yeah, it's a
right?
lot of faith, isn't it?
Even
And
internally, right?
yes, yeah, I was
Yes.
in we did the making of Fallout 3, and I was in a production meeting with Todd
Mm-hmm.
Howard, talking to his whole team about the game. And one of the developers stood up and said, well, our game doesn't look like Call of Duty. We're going to get killed. And Todd had a very diplomatic response. And then afterwards, he was like, God, our team doesn't get what we're making, because
Yeah. Well, look, yeah. It's a
it's,
constant thing. You don't just go, hey, this is our philosophy and we're all good, right? I mean,
yeah,
you're going to get it right and wrong hour by hour, day by day.
yeah,
And then you just have to kind of keep adjusting if you feel like you're faltering, right? In terms of making sure everybody's on the same page. And particularly when we're not geographically co-located, right? I mean, you
right.
have to have all these ways of feeling like you're sitting next to somebody at a desk over there, even though they might be a time zone away or many states away, right? And there's tools to do that. There's there's
Yeah.
video, there's team chat apps and things like that. But
Communication.
yeah, right. But it's like, boy, this isn't going to work if what people want to do is white knuckle control it, right?
Right.
Because this really requires painting the picture and then having faith that someone will deliver, and then just making little corrections. I mean, we always talk about that's why these sort of microcosmic analogies of going, it's like working with an actor. You don't give them a line reading, you give them direction and adjustments. A conductor
Mm,
doesn't go into the orchestra and try to play everybody's instruments. An art
right.
director shouldn't be trying to hold your pencil, right? Like, we talk about analogies to what it is that we're trying to do, and there are some analogies to understanding that as a director, you're conducting, right? You're not trying to play
Hmm.
everybody's instruments, but there's also analogies to improvisational jazz, right?
Yeah.
Which is you know, there isn't necessarily a roadmap. There's a shape to the thing, and then you're yes-anding each other to find
Yeah.
the final form of it, because you have to assume and trust people and have faith that they're actually going to come up with a better solution than you would have directed them to do. Right?
Absolutely. So the end result is every contributor, every brushstroke, every
thumbprints all
person.
over it. Yep.
Yeah, and they walk away and they're proud of that collective. They're proud of what all of you have put together, which is so crucial.
And I've always said, even if it comes out a little jangly, the jangly thing with everybody's fingerprints on it is better than a thing that would have been this sort of, you know, strictly executed auteur vision.
Yes, yes. All right. From your amazing veteran perspective, has that blue ocean you opted to pioneer begun to also become entrenched in tradition, etc.? This is from Eli.
Yes, Eli, it absolutely has. And look, I had to have, you know, after leaving EA and after the closure of Visceral, you know, there was a little bit of a exhale thinking moment for both Julian and I, right? Both having over 30 years in the business. And weathering all those changes, I think we're in a situation now, to be honest, where the weight of pressure on these games to be everything to everybody, it's unsustainable and unwieldy, right? And actually
especially
not that satisfying as a gamer anymore.
Yeah, and especially if you talk about exclusivity or just a diminished marketplace, and you know all of these things that we're talking about here. You know, obviously this is you trying to expound and get people in as many different ways as possible, right?
Right. Well, I mean, the fact that when I started, I mean, obviously when I started it was just me and a programmer, and then, but it'd be like, you know, you might take a year to make a game, you know, or a few months or something like that. And then my first team was 12 people, you know, and then it was 30, and then it was 75, and we get to a point now that these games take hundreds of millions of dollars to make. You know, hundreds of people plus external partners, and 5 years. It's like it's not fun anymore. And the pressure of spending that much money on that thing to deliver, right, is actually really diminishing our ability to have more at bats and to do more risky creative stuff. That's why we see more of that in the indie space, right? And even companies that have been more dedicated to the idea of taking creative risks are sort of battening down the hatches. And look, we've had these conversations, and I talk to a lot of gamer friends of mine. I think we start feeling a little disenfranchised from our own hobby because it's become kind of a serious elite hobby where it's sort of like, if I want to play something and feel like I'm going to see the beginning, middle, and end of it, and there's the arc of the story, and it's going to land, I love to play things that are 4 hours long, 5, 6, 8 hours long. It's like, that's rare anymore, right?
Right.
And it's like, you got bullet lists on the back of the box going, you're going to get 40 hours of gameplay, 60, 100. I'm like, I'm kind of out at this point because I'm playing.
The sweet spot is you want to walk away from a game going, oh my God, that was awesome. I want more. Not, oh my God, I just had another full-time job and I finished this game and I don't ever want to see this game again.
You don't get, right, so it's no longer, Julian always says, it's not something you can do on a Tuesday night, and it's not necessarily something you can do with your non-gamer, you know, spouse or household members, because it's like you're taking over the living room TV to do this thing that is kind of excludes them. And it's like, well, can we not rein in the scope, you know, rein in the time it takes so that we get more at bats? We don't want to spend more than a couple of years on these projects, and the scope and the focus has to come in accordingly, right?
Right.
And again, when we look at like trying to imagine this being like, you know, it's a misnomer because it brings up the wrong ideas, but almost like an interactive TV show, you know, in scope, that you go like, you know, I know that I can turn on Lovecraft Country and I'm going to get to watch the whole thing and there's going to be an arc and I'm going to get to the end of it. It's like, I want to play games like that. I want to have interactive story experiences like that where I can share it. It's manageable in scope, and then so it's manageable in scope as a gamer, and it's manageable in scope and focus as a developer, right? That you pick your battles, you know what you're focusing on, and you're not trying to check every damn box all the time.
Yeah,
that's the stuff that's unsustainable. And so when we talk about red oceans and blue oceans, the game industry is turning into a bit of a red ocean in that regard. And so when we left Visceral and EA, we went kind of walk about and talk to a bunch of people in and out of the game industry, the entertainment industry, just gamer friends like you, and just trying to like take the temperature and finding that everyone's feeling the same way, even if they don't say it out loud or publicly, right? And this is why we sort of ended up hewing toward entertainment companies and why we ended up partnering with Skydance, because they had the same vision of the future that we saw. Because again, full circle here, if it's not about story and character, you're not starting with what's important to people, right?
I've got a good question here relating to that. In your view, why do you believe that the industry has to do, or what do you believe the industry has to do to move completely away from the rhetoric that story is secondary to mechanics and have games accepted truly as an interactive art form? This is from Femi Boyer from Airship Industries. Images.
Well, look, I don't want to be misunderstood either. If when I'm giving a personal critique of where I feel like the industry is going or where some of these games are going, I have no problem with them existing. I even enjoy them on some level when I have a weekend or something. But some of these things fight story. Story is about intentionality and pace and propulsion.
Yes.
And there is a level of authorship. I wouldn't say auteur, but authorship, a shared authorship of the development team, right? Whereas the pressure to say this game is 100 hours long, it's about story, but it's 100 hours long, is so padded out that, all the air goes out of the thing, right?
Yeah.
We're not following very good storytelling principles in terms of keeping people engaged, right? So I feel like as story experiences, interactive story experiences, we're better off when we focus on limiting the scope and the focus, and making sure there's a beginning, middle, and end, and we are keeping good narrative pace and propulsion. That doesn't mean these other games shouldn't exist, but they're not going to be regarded in the same way if you're talking about will these things be looked at as art, right? I mean,
right.
And even that sounds sort of judgy and pejorative, and I don't even mean it that way. It's just that, like, in the greater context of entertainment industry in the world and consumers of media, they're going to look at an ongoing multiplayer shooter, or something like Fall Guys or whatever, which is great, as fun, but they might not take the same meaning they would take from this thing that was sort of authored, right?
There is this correlation, I feel, with Twitch and YouTube and games like that. I think about Overwatch from Blizzard, which feels like there is a huge hyper story connecting all of these disparate characters, but that's up to the player to figure it out, and it feels like that is engineered for, the scattershot, quick attention span of a YouTube viewer in a way, like there's a correlation there, definitely crafted with an intentionality, and like people knew what they were doing with this, but very different from your games and sort of what your philosophy is now, it feels like.
Yeah, and look, there's no dogma here, like I say, because sometimes people misinterpret. People are so dogmatic these days; they assume when you sort of express an opinion that it's like either or, pro, yes, yay, nay, and it's like no. I'm just expressing my personal kind of preferences and sort of what I am magnetized to. But like, as a storyteller, I do get a little dogmatic about the semantics around the word story, because I think that does imply intent and authorship, right?
Yeah.
Having a story-like experience where you have all kinds of player agency is not necessarily going to have the same kind of intent or land the same way. That doesn't mean it's not enjoyable, right? So this is a tricky one, right? Because on the one hand, one piece of interactivity that has nothing to do with buttons and mechanics is interpretation. There's a collaborative nature between the relationship between the game maker and the game player, right? That you want to leave enough to their imagination and their agency that they feel like they're collaborating and telling the story with you, right?
And making it theirs.
Right, but that doesn't mean it has to be branching. That can actually be really dilutive. It's more about the micro choices they make along the way and what you leave to interpretation so they feel that it is collaborative even just in that way. Now that's when we talk about these other games that are sort of just kind of loose sort of simulations where things can happen and you can kind of go, this happened, this happened, this happened, and that feels like a story. There's, again, nothing wrong with that, but it's almost entirely player interpretation sometimes versus going, there's room for player interpretation as a collaborative, performer within this story that we prescribed. But again, it's just it's kind of a different genre almost, right?
It is, and that's part of the wonderful thing about games, and I think what makes it so exciting for external devs who get to kind of work on a bunch of these different projects, because you can, work on a story-driven game like Zelda Breath of the Wild, which has so much, stories built from its physics-based gameplay. You walk away talking about how you rolled a boulder down you didn't know that you could do.
Right, exactly.
We've got a question here from Junie again saying, how would you describe the Skydance company culture, and how do you support and stimulate living up to those ideals with both internal and external team members, especially working remotely?
Right. So it's interesting because, we are in a partnership with Skydance. So we're internal, but we're also this new entity, right? And what's been great about, it's like we get the best of both worlds in a way. We have a certain level of kind of autonomy to sort of define this direction for this new frontier, but we are also sort of embraced inside, the womb of this established company. And David Ellison's vision for Skydance, which it was so exciting to us, is the idea that yes, there are all these spokes between, there's an existing interactive group that's, doing VR, there's, animation, there's film, there's TV, and then there's us exploring this new media space. He doesn't see those as silos.
Right.
He sees them as sort of this interconnected web where we can kind of learn stuff through collaboration, cross-pollination, and osmosis, whatever, right? The osmosis part is hard when we're all remote, right? But that underlying ethos of sort of safe creativity, it's a safe place to take risks, and that there's this expectation that these different mediums will plus each other, right? Through cross-pollination, is sort of kind of unique. I think a lot of people talk about that, but they don't live it the same way that Skydance does.
Right.
And the other thing too, and look, I say this just because I think it's important, is, we joined and then we've been going through this kind of terrible national and worldwide crisis, right? Boy, you get to see people's true character in times of crisis. And they are just so fundamentally good, and you don't necessarily expect that, but I mean, through, not only the pandemic, but through, our cultural crisis with, the murder of George Floyd and all the fallout from that, and the summer that we had, their heads and hearts are so screwed in right. Awesome. And it made us feel really great to know under pressure that we had signed with a company whose ethics were so on point.
So taking those lessons and then sharing them, I guess, is kind of up to all of you as ambassadors working under this, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, for sure.
As directors.
And exactly. And so in the sort of remote working world, obviously we do a lot of this. And it's not the same as being together in person, for sure, but and we make sure that even though we're all remote, and then everyone we're hiring, I mean, there's people that are part of the team I've never physically met in person before, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I only know them as a little postage stamp on the screen. They also feel embraced into the larger Skydance culture, and don't feel like they are sort of out in some sort of outer spiral arm of this galaxy, and that they participate in Skydance events and learning, and the social programs within Skydance, as well as connecting with people who may be in a different arm of the company. So we have a lot of shared DNA with the animation group, as you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
And so it's been great to talk to them about some of our shared concerns around collaboration and technology and things like that.
Amy, I feel like we're just getting started.
I know. Can we just do all day?
I know, right? Alas, our session is winding down right now, but I absolutely thank you to everybody that had sent in a question through Q&A.
Sorry, I'm a long-winded answerer. So.
Oh, you were wonderful, and I gosh, I adore talking with you, and I just think you're an amazing human.
Oh, thank you.
I can't wait to see you in person.
Back at you. I know.
Yeah, and
might be another year, so
we'll do more of this.
Well, if you're ever in the Bay Area, I'll stand 20 feet away from you and wait. So let me know.
I'll take you up on that, and
okay.
You also in Vancouver. But right. Everyone, please, from wherever you are, let's give it up for Amy Hennig, and thank you so much for joining us for XDS20 Great. Adapt, and best of luck.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll talk more soon, and I hope everyone has a great summit.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
That was Amy Hennig, everybody. Yeah, we've got a lot more coming up, so don't go anywhere. Lots to learn, lots of great conversations, lots to share. XDS is just getting started.